everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Tony Sirianni podcast. I'm thrilled to have Mary Ann Bartel with us today from Sanctuary Wealth Management. Mary Ann, thank you. Legend on Wall Street. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Sure. Hey, since we have you, we don't want to waste any time. I want to talk about the market. So, the 24 bucking bull market. What's your take on it? The other thing I was reading, we went from the Magnificent Seven to the Fab Four. Is that turning into recession? What are all your thoughts?
Sure. So when we came into the year, we called it the year of the bucking bull for both bonds and stocks. We think both could have good year, a good year, but there would be bucking. And of course, the fixed income market just has been bucking for the first quarter. But stocks really didn't buck very much. We really couldn't even get a good 2% correction. But I do think we're going to get a pullback here in the second quarter. But I think when we come, to this at the end of December, we're going to have good returns this year. I saw an economy that was improving, not going into a recession. But the real key to a stock market is earnings. Even though I'm trained as a technician and I worked for a technician, or I worked as the head of technical analysis at Merrill Lynch for many years, I've learned because I've also done quant, and I've done strategy. When you combine all the strategies together, at the end of the day, what keeps a market moving to the upside is earnings. You have to respect earnings. We've had scarce earnings in 2023, which is why growth stocks outperformed. When earnings are scarce, growth outperforms value. To get value to move, you need an abundance of earnings. So the philosophy behind that is when only a few companies are reporting earnings, everybody wants to own those companies. So their P/E multiple expands, right? So people are willing to pay up for that growth. When you have an abundance of earnings, fund managers become very selective about their valuation. And that's when you go into a value market. We do see earnings improving, but they're not abundant. So
Right.
I still think we're in a growth phase. And maybe we'll talk about AI because a lot of AI is really growth.
Yeah, I love
Um,
talking about AI. So,
so I'm actually looking for a good year. There will be a little bit of bucking. I'm still a buyer. I still think semiconductors are the leaders of the market. They're up very sharply, so they can pull back very sharply.
what
But
about politics? Because we have an election. Is that going to have an impact, or it's you're
what
factoring that in as part of the bucking?
clients don't like to hear this, but I generally say politics don't matter. And I understand that people are very passionate about their candidates. You have to look at what really drives the market. Again, it's earnings. That's already baked in for this year.
Right.
Politics will matter in 2025, right? Biden has signed 3 pieces of major legislation stimulating the economy by $3 trillion that are really starting to trickle into the economy this year. And then, of course, we all also know about the Fed and all the accommodation from the Fed. There's enough liquidity. When we take this $6 trillion of cash that
Yeah.
everyone's talking about and do it as a percentage of GDP of the economy, we're loaded with liquidity. Liquidity drives markets. So it's bullish. So politics will matter next year more than they do this year.
Well, that makes sense. And what about Fed rates? I mean, that's part of this discussion too, right? So,
So here's the other thing. Last year, we thought we were going to get rate cuts and the market was up 24%. And we got no rate cuts, right? So the market was able to go up because the economy was improving, earnings were improving. I think we're kind of in that same story. We just got ISM manufacturing numbers and it shows the economy really doing well. Now, inflation, people are calling it a little bit sticky, but core PCE is still at 2.8. There's a 2 handle there. And remember, CPI on a year-to-year basis is looking in the rearview mirror. It's not looking forward. So I still think there's the ability for inflation to go down, but the economy is growing. Will the Fed cut rates? This is where I say politics might matter. You might get a rate cut before the election. Do I really think right now the market needs a rate cut? I don't. I
right.
don't think the market needs a rate cut, but you still might get a rate cut before the election.
Well, you mentioned looking back, and of course, that's what AI can do, right? AI can't really look forward, it looks back. So we talked about, where it is. It's a big part of what's driving things right today. So, is that a bubble kind of thing you see, or is it's a real thing that's going to
I
drive
think
things?
it's a real thing that's in the early stages of a bubble.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are comparing this market to 1995. And the part that I think is 1995, if we take the Dow, and I'm using the Dow because we have so much history on the
Yeah.
Dow, and you look and you connect all the dots going up. In 1995, we broke through that. We went into a total different trajectory for the markets from 95 to 2000. So for a good 5 years, it wasn't 99 and 2000, it was 1995 to 2000. And I think, adding computers and the efficiency of computers, the internet started coming into the market. That really drove productivity enhancements. In fact, back then we used to call it TMT. And
Yeah.
that productivity enhancements did drive earnings. We did have some bucking in 97 and 98. And then we went into the bubble. But I recently went back and looked at the Dow from 1886 until the 20s. And I find the pattern of the market similar to the 20s, not the 90s. So I think we're in the very early stages of a bubble. And to me, this would make sense given all the liquidity that's still in the economy and that has been in the economy.
Oh,
And
what's interesting about that we look back to those times. I mean, those are such significant times. Electricity was coming. Technology was really changing the economy in
it
ways
was,
that people couldn't figure out. We didn't know where it was going
and
to
I
go.
don't think we know with AI. I think we
Right.
have
I agree.
ideas. I think we have ideas. I mean, as you said, electrifying. We're not electrified enough for AI, no less electric cars. And
Yeah.
copper is going to play a major role. I think that's why you're seeing copper break out, because you're going to need a lot of copper and you don't have a lot of supply of copper. There's a lot of infrastructure that has to get built out for AI. And I
Yeah.
think it's going to add efficiency. In fact, I'm starting to tell people, we've always talked about technology as a single sector. Technology now is going to be in every sector, right? If you're really going to branch out and have AI in every business and it's going to touch every individual, we're now Star Trek. We're moving into sci-fi.
Yeah, and
And
it's interesting because even in your business and ours, where we focus on the retail financial advisor, right? Right now, oh, well, it's not gonna affect me. It's client relationships, and it's like, well, it's going to affect you if you don't embrace it. So the people who don't get their arms around what it is and how it's going to help and make their business more efficient are going to be like the last buggy whip salesman. They're going to be stuck.
I 100% agree with that. What I'm telling people is if you have a business, you need to embrace AI and figure out how. And it's productivity enhancements, right? It
Yeah,
could be a simple thing as it can help you write client letters.
right.
But the time that you save, right? You have to edit and things of that nature. And we're all trying to figure it out. I'll give you an example. I had a friend call me and he asked me to talk about some of my ideas and he recorded it. And then he gave it to an AI app to summarize it. And you can ask for different styles. I
Yeah.
was in a state of shock and it did a really good job. It didn't even need any editing. So there, you can record client calls and have it put in a format. I mean, there's so many different things that we're probably not even aware of that we'll eventually be doing. And obviously the game changer is NVIDIA. They have developed the chip and the software. And at least right now they have a competitive edge and they have a lead. And so, I find these to be very exciting times.
Yeah.
We're in the digital era. One of the things that I talk about is in the 1500s, we were an agricultural economy and the technology was a sundial. Then we graduated when we created the steam engine to an industrial economy. We're digital now.
Yeah.
And we're going to stay digital. For the rest of our lives, we are now in a digital world and we need to embrace it. And I understand for certain generations, including my own, sometimes it's hard to embrace. Like I was just with my daughter and I was doing something, I was sending a message and she showed me how to do something that I didn't know how to do. And she laughed at me. She's like, Mom, you've been copying and pasting the whole time?
Got the same
I
copy
didn't know I
pasting
could push
myself.
that little plus button and go get my photo.
Right.
Right. So the younger generation, I mean, it's natural to them.
Yeah, I think, but some of that's interesting too, because we've been through our generation, right? I'm sure you're younger than me, but our generation has been through at least one of these major moves and had to the phones and the having everything. This is, going to change now, right? So with AI, I think that's going to be the next thing. But we've actually lived through like from a biplane to a jet plane. we've actually seen it. Our generation sort of had to make all these accommodations, and now there's another accommodation coming with AI.
And the thing is, the younger generation embraces change.
Yeah.
They expect change. The new technology is easy for them. I think for some of us, change isn't always so easy, but I tell people you have to change. And I learned that from my aunt. My aunt that went to Wall Street in 1956. What she taught me is you had to embrace the change and the change in technology. And when she went to Wall Street, the technology was a ticker tape.
Yep.
People actually stood up and read the ticker tape to the trading floor. Wild, right?
Well, it's not that crazy. When I started at Merrill Lynch in New York City, we still had pink sheets in the office. You had to go to the sheets and look at it. We had one computer on a Lazy Susan for 4 advisors. I'm not that old, but that was it. You were lucky
We,
to get stock quotes.
right. I remember something called the bunker. Remember the bunker? And
Oh, I
people
remember the
that
tube, the
younger people
pneumatic
listening to
tube.
this, that they're
Yeah.
gonna like, what's a bunker? It was the terminal where you could get quotes.
Yep. Yep. And then we had a line, and a fax machine was like fascinating technology. And there was a line. It took like an hour to send a fax. You know what I mean? It was a line of folks waiting outside the fax machine.
So I remember a fax machine. I was working at Chuck Clow at Merrill Lynch at the time, and we would send out a fax every week and I would prepare it. Then of course, eventually we went to email. And I remember one day our email went down and we're like, well, how are we going to get our report out? And we're like, oh, the fax.
Dust it off, get it ready. Well, actually, this brings up, you said Chuck Cloud, you mentioned your aunt. One of the things coming up, I think I mentioned maybe in the beginning, or you and I talked about in the beginning, but our women's conference is coming up on April 17th. And, obviously you've been a trailblazer and, done some great. My daughter, I have 4 daughters. So one of my third daughter just got into our business. So she's getting her license and all that kind of stuff, which I'm very proud of. Um, but mentorship has been a big deal. You mentioned your aunt, you mentioned a couple of mentors. Let's talk about that in regards to women getting in our business.
Well, congratulations that your daughter's going in the business. I think it's a great business for women. I originally did not want to have anything to do with Wall Street. To me, Wall Street was, preppy, wearing everything uptight. And I was very theatrical and wanted to, be on Broadway. But my aunt, I would have lunch with her and, somewhere during lunch, these pieces of paper would come out. She would start teaching me about markets. And she says, Mary Ann, I don't know where you're going in your career, but you as a woman really need to understand finance and how to manage your own money. Obviously, I wound up coming to Wall Street. My hopes at Broadway kind of went, my mom said I had a brain and I needed to go to college. My aunt said the same thing, and I had another aunt. So I went to college and here I am. And I don't regret it. But I was very fortunate because I had my aunt as a mentor. In fact, I worked in her business for a number of years. I set up her computer system. So technicians back in the day did everything by hand on green accounting paper. I was floored. And I had to do those things for her, and it was a pain in the neck. And I'm like, we have to get a computer. And I converted everything to a computer. And of course, she was excited because I could show her we could do moving averages, just like that, instead of having to, use the calculator and everything. And then when I got my first job, she helped me get my first job. And my first job, I had a woman mentor. So I had a very unusual path for a woman on Wall Street where I had a very strong female
Yeah.
influence.
And I
And then
think
eventually,
most women would say they've had a lot of male mentors as well. I mean,
oh,
have
I did. Eventually, eventually, right, all my other mentors wound up being men. And, whenever you see a person achieve something, you know that there have been people behind them supporting them. And what I always tell young people in their new careers is that they need mentors and sponsors, right? And, in a large organization like Merrill Lynch, you would have your mentor, but you would work with different departments. Those are your sponsors. And as a female, I really wasn't taught to boast about myself and tell my boss all the wonderful things that I was doing. And I didn't ask my sponsors to tell my boss. But I watched the men, and it took me until I was 40 to realize that I had to speak up for myself, right? My boss wasn't always going to go around and find out what I was doing. So I would ask people for emails. when I did a project for them and they found it useful, I would get an email and I would send it to my boss. And he found that very helpful, especially when he did my review. And I find even today, many women are not
I would agree.
cultured in doing that. We expect that it will come. So one of the big things I say is you have to be your own advocate.
Well, I've seen that, as well, and I try to tell my daughters the same thing. Part of it too, what I'm concerned about for the future, and I have four kids that are 28, 22 to 28, right? Just joining the workforce. We had all this COVID stuff, and now we've got this new work environment. Well, our business and a lot of Wall Street is an apprentice business. You have to kind of be in there and know it, and it's very hard to get mentors from a Zoom environment. So that's one of the things I'm concerned about, going forward, to develop exactly what you said, sponsors and mentors. You and I did this in offices. We don't need to do it today. We already have our friends and colleagues, right? But it's hard to start cold.
I 100% agree with that. You're not going to be mentored online. You need to be in a work environment, even if it's 3 days a week.
Yeah.
I think you do need to be in the office. You need to be seen, right?
You need to be seen and you need to hear. You need to, oh, this person down the street, they really know muni bonds. You don't know anything about it. Maybe you'll love muni bonds, who knows? But you talk to them, you go to lunch or you eat lunch together, in the conference room, something.
Yes, I 100% agree. And, I was listening to somebody and they said that, occupancy now is around 65%. In some of the buildings in New York City. And it used to be like 75, 80%. So we're not that far. People are back, at least in New York, back in the city. Now, I actually work from home, but that's okay at my stage of my career. But I
Yeah,
do encourage young people to really, if they can be in a business, in an office business environment, it would really help them
yeah.
learn and grow.
Well, one of the things you do is like you're coming to our conference, you get yourself out there, going to the different, so you can actually, meet and greet people, which is important, especially because people are separated today. That's why I like the idea of these conferences. They kind of bring everybody together, which is a nice thing. So
I agree with that. I love women conferences.
yeah, it's fun. All right. Well, and then on a side note, I think I mentioned this to Katie Stockton, who's also coming. We actually drink more alcohol at the women's conference than we do at all the other conferences. So it's on a per capita basis. We always have a good time there.
I had no idea, and
That's
I'm
true.
really happy to see Katie. I know Katie, and she's a phenomenal
Oh,
technician, and I'm so proud of her because she has her own business, right? We don't see many women open up their own businesses.
and a
And
nice ETF she's got. It's a great program. We'll hear from both of you at the event. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
yes, so please come. If you're watching this, please come to the event.
Thanks a lot. Thanks. Well, look, we'll talk again, Mary Ann. This has been a great time.
Thank you so much for having me, Tony.
Sure.